What's up, everybody? Welcome to this Skyscraper title animation tutorial. I'm getting many questions in the comments on Facebook, Twitter, and here on YouTube if I could do title animation tutorials. If you know this channel, I'm always trying to like push it a little further and come up with something interesting. And I saw this movie trailer a couple of weeks, actually months ago, from Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's new movie Skyscraper. And I asked myself if I could recreate that in After Effects with no plugins. Check. Yes, it's possible. And take it a step further and make a fully functional Mograph template for Premiere Pro out of it. And the answer is yes, it is possible. It was actually pretty easy to do. I ran into a couple of problems when exporting the Mograph template. I'm going to show you in a minute. Yeah, you end up getting this Mograph, fully functional Mograph template, which looks exactly like the title animation in that movie trailer. Please don't just bounce. I mean, I'm having a really hard time with people bouncing right off the channel because they download everything. Please do me a huge favor. Watch the video all the way through. The download link is waiting at the end of this video. Don't worry, it's not going anywhere. So that's one favor that I'm asking of you. All right. So let's get right into it. We're here in Cinema 4D, and this is step number 1. That's the background element. So let's start by bringing in a cube, and then go into the fillet. Check fillet, and you have this round edges here, and then with this interactive elements, you can just play around with it until you have an interesting shape. And that's basically the shape that I ended up using for this whole thing. And we can leave it as a parametric object. We don't have to make it editable. And now bring in a cloner effector, put the cube into the cloner effector. And then we have something like this. And then go into the mode and put it on grid array. Then we have this, and then play around with the count, which is actually we don't need any. Hang on a second. Okay, that's the one. We will have. We will need something like this, and then crank up the size in the Y direction all the way up. Hold down Shift so it's bigger steps, and then just eyeball it something like this. And then we will grow. We will have to grow in on the Z axis as well. So let's bring in some clones there, and then we end up having something like this. As you've seen, what was that? 2 minutes? Pretty simple. You could, of course, go in and then tweak it a little more and make it more accurate so there's no gaps in between, but it's still not overlapping. You have this gap here. Hold down Shift and then bring it closer, and then you have this structure here. Simple as that. That's basically what I have used for the final result. And now we have to twist and bend it a little bit. But before we do that, let's first take a look at the material, because we have this reflective material which looks like the facade of a skyscraper. And for that, bring in a sky object. Boom. And then I had created this material here already. So the material is actually nothing else. Let me create a new one. New material. Go into the material and the color channel. Load in the texture. And here I have this HDR image, which is actually a 360 image of a photo studio. I have to admit, I did not put too much time into recreating this HDR. I did use this one. I could have went into HDR Light Studio and paint every reflection in, so it's 100% accurate, but that's good enough. So we end up with this material. And then what I did here in Blur Offset, cranked it up all the way to 20. So it's nice and smooth. Within that HDR, I brought this black point up a little bit, all the way up to 0.2, and the white point all the way up to 2. Just to crunch it a little more, make it more, to introduce more contrast. And then I took this material and put it on the sky object. And the next thing that you need to do is put a material on the cloner, so it actually does reflect something. When we hit render, no reflections here on that structure. And for that, I have this material. So bring in a new material and go into the reflectance. And let's set the type to board. And then bring down the roughness to 0, the reflection strength, something like this. And then all of a sudden, you see that already you have something reflective, and then put the attenuation to average. And then you have this super reflective material like metal. And then put that on the cloner. And you already see the reflection of that studio light here. Okay, that's basically it. Super simple, really simple. Now render this and you see the reflections. It's too clean. We'll take care of that right now. The next thing, one thing I want to do is exclude the sky object from the camera. So right click on the sky object, Cinema 4D tags and composition, and then uncheck scene by camera here. That's one thing you need to do. So when you render this, it starts looking like the final thing. And now we want to twist and bend this. So let's go into the cloner and bring in a twist deformer. And as you can see, when you use this and crank it all the way up, oh my God, what's going on? It doesn't work because it's not looking at the object, it's looking at the cloner object itself, that single unit. But we want to actually bend the whole thing. So for that to work, put the cloner into a null object, bring in the null object, bring in the cloner, and now the twist deformer needs to actually be a child of this null object, like this. So that's the structure that you're going to need. And the twist needs to be set to unlimited. And now when you play with the twist, nothing's happening. Hang on a second. We have to rotate this by 90 degrees. And then when we play with the twist deformer, it's something like this. And although it's set to unlimited, it's treating it as if it was within a box. So you still have to scale it up just a little bit, and then you start seeing this structure coming together. That's basically what they did with, let's rotate this null just a little bit. And now it's twisted. And the very last thing that we need to do is bring in a bend deformer, just to bend it in the y-axis, this red axis here, just to bend it a little bit, and bring that in as well. And then check keep y-axis length, put the mode to unlimited, and crank up the strength. And now you see it coming together. See that? Boom. Now it's looking like the structure that we are aiming for. As you can see, you have to tweak it and play around with it a little bit, and you end up with something like this. And then you have this structure, and then take that null, bring it into place. And the last thing, when we render this out here, it starts looking like the final thing. And then bring in a camera, put the focal length to 25. And then you might want to tweak the sky object so it's actually showing an interesting reflection. Maybe something like this. It starts starts to come together. Yeah. And the last thing you want to do is bring in an environment object, because when you see, look at the final trailer, you see that structure fading out in the distance. And you can do that with an environment object and just enable fog and put the color to something dark. And then when you render it now, as you can see, it starts fading out in distance. Put the distance, the strength to 20%, and the distance to something around 2,000 centimeters. Oh, that's way too close. Oh yeah. Let's try 7,500. One more thing that you have to do, you have to uncheck Effect Background, and then when you render it, you start seeing what's happening here. And as you can see, the opposite edge is actually fading out in the distance, and that's basically how you create that background. It starts looking just like the background element in that trailer. And you can of course play around with the settings, strength and distance, until it comes together. The last thing that I did was actually animating the camera. So this is the starting point, and then go to 0, set a keyframe here, and then go all the way to 90 frames, which is my preview range. Move the whole thing just a little bit, something like that. And then record another keyframe at 90 frames. And then when we play this, you get this nice smooth movement. The last thing that you want to do is go into the timeline, Shift F3, and then put the interpolation of these keyframes from the camera to linear, so we don't have any easing on the motion. And that's basically it. That's how you create the background. It's very simple. As you've seen, a couple of minutes, few steps, and you've got yourself a background just like in a movie trailer. Now export this. I exported that as a PNG sequence. Output Full HD. Frame range all frames, which is my preview range, 0 to 90 frames. And then save out a PNG and set a destination, and then hit Render to Picture Viewer. And you're all set. Now let's move on to After Effects. Okay, so we're here in After Effects, and now just import that background you created in Cinema 4D. Here's that background file. That's the one that I created, and it basically looks pretty similar to the one in the movie trailer. So let's create the actual text, and that's pretty simple as well. Go into the text file, drag a text box, and say, whoops, I'm on a US keyboard here, but I'm using a German layout because most of the day I'm writing German. So the font that I used is Compressa Micro Condensed. I'm a little bit obsessed with fonts, so it took forever to actually find the font that they used in the movie, and I'm pretty sure it's this font here. It's Compressa Micro Condensed Light. Hang on, select the text and set it to light. That's basically it. And then scale it all the way up. Reposition that. And that's basically it. So in the final trailer, as you can see, they it looks like they tweaked the letter K right here. But I'm not going to do that because I want to keep actually the functional font, so you can go into the Mograph template and put in your own text. For that, this font needs to be functional. So how do we actually create the 3D text? Turn this text into a 3D object. Then go into the geometry options, set the extrude depth to 15, something like that. And then set the bevel type to convex. And then we need something that is being reflected on the text. And for that, let's bring in another HDR file, which is this one here. Import that, bring it into the scene, and then right click and set it to environment layer. And then it's going to be used as the actual environment. And you still can't see anything. So for that, you have to do a couple of things. Go into the AE Light HDR, use the effect HDR Compander. So that pretty much like what we did in Cinema 4D will help crunching the contrast in that HDR and tweak it to our liking. And then put the gain to, I did that before, 0.85, and the gamma to 0.10. Still nothing happening because we have to go into the actual material and set the material to cast shadows to on. The ambient needs to go down to 0. You can see some changes here, and then set the specular shininess to 50, and then the reflection intensity, that's the key here, all the way to 75. Still nothing's happening. One thing that I forgot is we're going to use a level adjustment here. And now, when we tweak this a little bit, turn off the environment, you start seeing something. And now let's go back to the gain. That's really important to find the right setting here, because just a slight difference, and now we start seeing something. Let's set that to 0.7. Let's see what that looks like. See, that's a huge difference, 0.6. And it starts to come together. Let's see what this level adjustment does. And we are getting there. And remember, that's just for the reflection. We need something to, we need to introduce some lights to illuminate the scene just a little more. So bring in a new light. Use the default settings. And as you can see, already it's illuminating the whole thing. Then bring this all the way up. Then go into this light settings and bring the intensity up to 200. And maybe bring in Control-Alt-Y, bring in an adjustment layer and use levels there as well. And then duplicate that light and bring that over. Maybe adjust the position a little bit. Duplicate it one more time. And adjust that radius just a little more. And that's basically how I created this title. And it starts looking like the final piece. And it looks like you'd have to go into the HDR Compander again and then see how you can change this gain. As you can see, you really have to find the sweet spot so it looks actually like a shiny metal. Maybe see what the gain does here. That was way too much, of course. 0.12, what about that? And I have a pretty powerful machine and it still needs some time to render. Let me put that to third quality. That should be okay. The gamma can go back to 0.17. Let's bring this to, I don't know, 0.75. What about that? Now the last thing, that's this flare, and for that we will create a new solid. We will apply our beloved optical flares. And the flare that I ended up using is, I think it was this one, Spells. So adjust the global color, push it more towards blue. Okay, bring that in. Say okay. In the render mode, you can go to transparent and then set the position to the position in the trailer. And it starts looking like something looking exactly like in the movie. And then we just animate the brightness because it looks like it's pulsating. And the trailer starts from 0. Boom, and then animate this. Something like this. Copy the keyframes and then bring it down just a little bit. 50. Maybe the scale isn't animating as much. Put that to 1/4. And then pre-render. And then render a preview to see what it looks like. And there you go. That's basically your Skyscraper title animation. One thing that I did was bring in a camera, and all I did was animate the position for the final render. Then use the track Z tool. So this is the end position. And then just go in and animate the movement. And as you can see, the flare needs to be 3D as well. So let's go to the end position and then put it on 3D right there. And then as it will sit in the right position. And that's basically it. One last thing that I did, I went into the adjustment layer, into light HDR and put a Gaussian blur on it. So the reflections are nice and smooth. I don't know, let's test this. Does it look right? And now things start to come together. Of course, I did omit that this part right here within these 2 letters where it shows that structure again, but that's good enough for the scope of this tutorial. The background is pretty easy. So here's what you have rendered out from Cinema 4D, and then just since we did that already, duplicate the text, bring it in here. And of course, we need all the lights and this light as well. So we can just extend them. There it is. And make it much smaller. Like this. And then just rotate it a little bit so it looks something like a final thing. And I think I cranked up the intensity of these light sources, so it looks a little more like what we had in the trailer. Maybe bring down the position a little more. Something like that. And you could as well go in and tweak the extrusion just a little bit. Something like that. And that's basically it. And it starts looking like the final thing, right? And since we have some movement baked into the background animation, as you can see, we need the same movement in the camera. So bring in another camera like this, and just like we did with the main text. Hit the stopwatch, take the drag Z tool and animate just a little bit. And again, bring in another lens flare. Go into the settings, and then just get rid of that vertical. Where is it? There it is. And then adjust the color. Like this. Okay, okay. Bring down the brightness and bring up the scale so we get the streaks back. Something like this. Maybe even more and less brightness. And then it should look something like in the trailer. And then, of course, you want to bring it to the right position, like this. Make sure that your 3D render settings are on Cinema 4D. For me, at least, Ray Traced did yield an error. It did not work. And Classic 3D is not going to work because it will not give you this visual result that we are after. That's actually the creation of the 3D text itself. As you can see, pretty simple. Now let's get to actually creating the Mograph template, which is bringing a whole another set of problems because of the flares. Let me show you why. Okay, so we're in Premiere Pro now, and here is the final Mograph template. And as you can see, it really works. We are here in the settings that are carrying over from After Effects to Premiere Pro, and let's see if we can edit this Mograph template. This template comes with a caveat, of course. You have to have exactly this font. You can't change the font just yet, and you have to have After Effects installed for the 3D effect to work. It gives you a warning when you export that motion graphics template, which I will show you in a minute. So let's head back to After Effects and see how this Mograph template actually is created. First thing we're going to do is we will bring in a switch, expression controls, checkbox. And now let's say we want to toggle the visibility of this flare. Okay? How do we do that? Let's open the opacity. Let's alt-click the stopwatch. And we will need a little expression that will help us toggle the visibility. At this point, you can't bring in the opacity. There's no way to actually have this icon here, visibility icon, bring it into the Essential Graphics panel. So you have to use a helper checkbox, which is this one. So here in the opacity expression, let's say if checkbox equals 0, closing bracket, then 0. What this does is when the checkbox says 0, you have to have a comparative operator. If you had only 1, it would assign actually this value to the checkbox. So if the checkbox is 0, and when it's unchecked, the checkbox actually, let me lock this. A checkbox only can output 0 or 1. When it's not checked, it's 0. When it's checked, it's 1. So if checkbox is unchecked, put the opacity value to 0, semicolon, else value. You could also say else 100. It's exactly the same thing because the opacity was set to 100 before you started typing that expression. Of course, this is not going to work. Even if the name of the checkbox matches this name here. So select this and now use this pick whip here and drag it onto the checkbox. And now it will replace it by the right path to the checkbox, which is this comp layer, adjustment layer, effect, but you don't have to do that. As you've seen, let me redo this. Your placeholder, this word checkbox, just select it and then pick whip to the checkbox, and After Effects will do the rest for you automatically. And now when you use the checkbox, you can toggle the visibility of this layer. It's pretty simple, okay? And now what you can do, of course, you can, let me delete all these things here because this is for the actual tutorial template. This is Comp 1, and there is nothing in that Essential Graphics panel just yet. So let's bring in another thing that you have to know is that you can't just drag this checkbox in here. Nothing's happening. You have to go into the adjustment layer, and right here, twirl open that checkbox control and take that checkbox and drag it in here. Okay, give it a name. And from here, you can toggle it on and off. And this will carry over to the Mograph template in Premiere Pro. Now let's talk about why I put that in, why I actually have an MP4 file. When I was initially creating this, I was like, hey, you know what? I can export a PNG sequence with transparency, not a problem. But I ended up with a huge Mograph template, file, which was close to 1 gigabyte. I could not even import that to Premiere Pro. And then I thought, okay, not a problem. Just render it on black and knock out the black with the track matte, with the blend mode, which is put it on screen and then knock out the black. The problem is when you put a layer to 3D, either ray traced or Cinema 4D, it does not have blend modes anymore. Now I had to find a way to actually knock out the black without blend modes so I can use it in 3D. And that was a huge problem, and still have smaller files. And the way you can do this, the way you can have a 3D layer, again, I could not use PNG sequence with transparency because it was way too big. And I ended up using shift channels. So what this does is you can set the alpha to luminance. So it will not take the black into account, or actually it will take the black into account because there is no luminance on the black channel. When you do that, you will see this. It also takes away a lot of the flare. So I had to bring that back. For that, I had to use levels. And when you tweak the gamma just a little bit, the flare will start coming back. Okay? And then it will look something like this. Looks like the final flare. But now, the next problem, it's taking away the saturation just a little bit. So I had to introduce another effect, which is hue and saturation, and to bring back the saturation so it looks like this. So it looks like the final result. As you see, you're running in a whole, from one problem into the next problem because of this file size and 3D layer and everything. So bottom line, I could not use PNGs with transparency because they were too big. I had to use something smaller, which is this MP4, and then find a way to knock out the black. And that's a little trick. Use shift channels and then use levels and hue saturation to bring it back so it looks like the original video. And then this layer can be, of course, this can be 3D, and it will react to the camera just like expected and sit at the right position. But what about the position actually of this flare when we want to move it? For that, we have to introduce another expression control. Let's go back to our comp and let's use our example here. So in the adjustment layer, right click and go to expression control, go to slider control, and this slider will be the position for X position of the flare. Okay. So right click on the position, since we only want to bring the X value into the Mograph template, separate dimensions, and now take this X position. Here on the right side, take this pick whip. Let's go back to our adjustment layer, lock this so it stays in place. X position, take that pick whip and bring it to the slider. This will inherit the value of the slider, which was sitting at 0. So bring it back to, and now when we tweak the slider, it will move the flare. Pretty simple. One last thing that you want to do, you want to restrict the range of the slider, because what you could do, if you put that to, I don't know, this value, you can send the flare to oblivion and it will just sit somewhere and you will not know where it is. So actually right click this edit value and then set a range from actually 0 to 1920, which is the composition width. So that way you can't lose that. You can't lose the position anymore. And now, as usual, if you want to bring this in, it's not going to work from here. You have to go into the adjustment layer, go to the slider control, and then drag the slider control into the Mograph template. Call it flare X position. Boom, and that's basically it. As you've seen in my final template, I put in a couple of comments just to organize everything in your motion graphics template. And that's basically what happened. The last thing that you want to do is actually bring in the source text, and that's very simple. Go into your template. I'm having a little glitch here. Go into your template, and here's my comp. Here's my source text. Twirl open the source text and just drag this source text into your template. And now here, you can test it by saying, what's up? Yep. And it will update your scene. And these are the 3 values that I brought into the motion graphics template. Again, keep in mind, the caveat of this template is actually, you have to have After Effects installed, so it looks exactly like this. You're going to need the font, Compressa Micro Condensed, and purchase it from that website. And that's, I'm pretty sure, the font that they used in the title animation for this movie. And then you can go in and tweak this to your liking. So that's how you create that Skyscraper movie trailer title animation in After Effects without any plugins, and end up having a fully editable motion graphics template for Premiere Pro. Go ahead and download the template from my website. It's completely free. Feel free to use it. And if you have any questions, put it into the comments. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video. I hope you learned something, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.